Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This week I had the opportunity to sit down with our VP of Sales, Stu, to talk all about data, third-party data, first-party data, and the opportunities that exist for the advertising ecosystem to move to a first-party world. But first, we had the opportunity to catch up on the announcements that came out of Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference in San Jose around their new privacy features. So let's dive straight into Stu's thoughts on Apple's announcements.
Yeah, God bless Apple. They all seem to slip under the radar when it comes to these kind of big announcements. Everybody gets excited about Google and what are Google going to do and what are they going to say. Yeah. And everybody forgets about Apple a little bit. But they made some fairly substantial announcements this week around kind of the management of email and login, and particularly around kind of preventing the use or the misuse of location data, which I think arguably is a really positive thing. Essentially, they're going to make it much more difficult to collect and use that location data, whether that be through getting apps to ask you on a regular basis, do you continue to give your consent for this to be used, or blocking some of the workarounds to capturing that data through kind of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, etc. I think location data is one of those kind of last areas of privacy focus that needs to be addressed. Arguably kind of the kind of wild west still of data capture and usage. So I think it's probably a positive thing for the industry. I think it could have a fairly substantial impact on how people view that location data and what they do with it. Be interesting to see how Google react. Right. And arguably, Apple have probably done more to move the privacy debate on with their actions than any other kind of player in that space. You could argue Google being quite reactive to those kind of Apple moves. If you think things like ITP. And Google's reactions to that. So it'll be interesting to see what Google do. Obviously, their challenge with Android is it'll be much harder for them to do that without having a real kind of high commercial impact. So we shall see, but it's probably a positive thing. Time will tell how much impact it's going to have, but I think it's probably fairly substantial.
Yeah, and I guess we're going to see more and more over the coming weeks and months as things kind of evolve. As you say, will Google react? Google have a much larger market share, both from a browser point of view and from their phone OS, Android. So it'll be interesting to see how they react. But yeah, so we're going to talk today specifically about data, different types of data. So we should start, I guess, by defining the types of data we're going to talk about. We're going to start with third-party data, and third-party data is data you've sourced from a third party who weren't the original collector of that data. So like a data aggregator. And first-party data, that's the data that's most powerful, really, I guess, and most relevant because it's the data you collect from the people you have a direct relationship with. So arguably, it's the most relevant and it's the most accurate data that can be collected. So if we start with third-party data, we've seen kind of a shift or a trend away from third-party data. I think it's fair to say in the last few years. I've seen articles dedicated to why marketeers need to kind of wean themselves off third-party data. So what's happened? Why has there been a change in perception of third-party data?
Yeah, I think, and maybe slightly controversial, but I think third-party data probably gets a bit of a bad rap. Right. Fundamentally, third-party data is the same as first-party data in terms of what the actual data is. It's just data collected from activity and engagement with web properties. The fundamental difference is who's collecting it. And therefore, within that, transparency around consent and legal basis for processing, and transparency around kind of the makeup and the origination of that data, et cetera, et cetera. So it does get a bad rap, and that's probably fueled some of the kind of move away from it. But I think broader than that, it's some fundamental differences around kind of first and third party to do with trust, with that kind of privacy management, and the way in which kind of that data is handled. So third party is, as you rightly say, somebody else has collected it. It's an entity on the property, web property, collecting information about usage, engagement, etc., and then offering that up for sale. I think why brands are shying away from it is primarily down to that lack of transparency. They don't know where it's come from. Necessarily, they can't see the depth of insight and attribute that kind of values within it. They kind of predefine this is a segment that you have to just work with. And the privacy bit of, and I don't know what the consent looks like within that. That is a risk factor, is a challenge, is a concern for those looking to use that data. From those that are providing that data and where the data is being collected, equally there are some concerns. What's being collected, how is it being kind of packaged up and manipulated? Is it competitive with my own offering? Am I able to rightly and justifiably say that the right levels of consent have been gained for that? Because ultimately I'm on the hook, it's my users, it's my data that's being collected. So those providing that space for those third-party data providers to collect and manipulate that data also get nervous. So it's not so much about the data itself. Third-party data in itself is no better or worse from a origination point of view than first party.
Right.
It's about the fundamentals of how you collect it, what you do with it, how you manage that privacy and consent, how you manage that governance, etc., etc.
Interesting. So if we talk about first party data then, that, to me as a marketer, that sounds like a gold mine, being able to access direct insights about the people that you are having a direct relationship with, who are interacting with your brand. So why don't we see more advertisers, publishers, and more of that data get used in the advertising ecosystem?
Yeah, so as we're just saying, first party data in itself is the same kind of data as third party. It's just it's owned and controlled and manipulated and managed and presented by the person who has that relationship with the end user.
Yeah.
So it's much easier to control it. It's much easier to say I've got the right levels of consent and control. There's a much more direct relationship. If a user arrives on a site and it's brand A saying I'm collecting data about you, that's really easy for the user to understand that relationship. If it's a random company X that I know nothing about that is a third-party provider, as a consumer, there's a much more kind of obscure or disjointed relationship there, and it's harder to kind of get that consent. But I think fundamentally, why first-party data wins over third-party data, other than the fact you can get a lot more richness within that because you can start to bring in your known audience data, your PII data, your CRM-based kind of engagement and purchase behaviour and the data that kind of really talks about the deep workings of your site and your interaction with those users. It comes down to privacy and governance and the kind of trust levels, I guess. So from a privacy point of view, again, to just reiterate, if I'm collecting the data, it's much easier for me to say, this is what I'm collecting, this is why I'm collecting it. Do you consent? Do you give me some kind of legal basis for that? Yeah. And then importantly, manage that consent process. The same with kind of those trust levels. If I'm going to activate my CRM data in market, then I want to control that. I want to know that I have full control over that. I can't get that when I'm giving it to a third party. I lose control of my data the second it goes to somebody else. So if I'm holding that data, I'm keeping that data, and I'm using it myself, then I feel much safer and more secure about that process. And that's why first-party data wins over third-party data.
And I guess, so thinking about why it doesn't get used, potentially that comes down to kind of this analysis of risk versus reward. So the risk of things going wrong with first-party data and the risk of issues with the use of that in the advertising ecosystem, allowing it to be used in that advertising ecosystem. At the moment, those risks don't quite add up to the reward that you're going to get from that. So from an InfoSum point of view, what can we do and what are we doing to help rebalance that risk and reward and make the risk less and therefore the reward worth it?
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point there about risk and reward. The challenge of first-party data or the use of first-party data in the current makeup of the ecosystem is our ecosystem is predicated on a third-party data or third-party environment delivering portability of data. If you want to activate your first-party known audiences in the market, you need to be able to identify that in other environments. And the current ecosystem predicates on that third-party portability. So even if it's first-party data at the moment, I'm giving it to somebody else to then port that data into other environments. And that is the fundamental risk and reward challenge. Is it worth the risk of doing that and losing control and giving up some of those privacy concerns to get the rewards of using it? And often the answer is no, and that's why we don't see it. The InfoSum approach really tries to reimagine the way that works. This principle of being able to take all the insights and all the value and all the activation opportunities that are locked up in that first-party environment and take them into other environments is it's a strong draw. But doing it through InfoSum with this kind of decentralised, non-movement of data, the ability to do all that great connectivity, learnings, understandings, insights, activation into an environment, but you don't ever actually have to give your data to anybody.
Right.
You don't ever actually have to lose control of that data. You don't have the same privacy concerns of kind of sequential privacy management and am I able to properly manage that consent? I don't have the same risks around I've given my data to somebody else and I've lost control. The InfoSum platform works in a way where we just do away with all those concerns. We make it really clear, really simple, really easy to activate that value and not have those same kind of concerns and risks that exist.
So what we really talk about there is this idea, this kind of first-party connectivity between the different bodies within that ecosystem. So if we start looking at kind of those, what would be the impact for a brand on their advertising campaigns of being able to use that first-party data and that first-party connectivity?
Yeah, potentially significant because often they don't use that data at the moment, and that data is their richest source of insight and understanding. Their ability to know details about their customers, what are their behaviours and habits, to know about lapsed customers, to know about prospects, to know about customers, be able to suppress customers within campaigns and say, I'm going to run a marketing campaign, but I'm not going to serve it to people who are already customers. They seem really trivial and easy things to kind of sit and say, why don't we do that? But they don't happen at scale because of those concerns. So from a brand point of view, just from kind of starting point zero, just being able to say, I can actually activate some of that value, even before I get into the world of really deeply kind of understanding and interrogating and driving insights and value and understanding of all of that. Just some of those simple concepts of, I can serve ads to customers or not to customers without having to give up that information, without having to pass that information to other people. So lots of short-term significant impacts just by being able to say I can safely, securely, in a trusted, privacy-safe manner activate that audience is hugely beneficial. And then when we start building on that and saying, and actually I can then use all of my deep kind of acquisition-based behaviour. I can look at kind of that deep long-term relationship. I can understand all the kind of the attribute values of everything that's locked up in my known audience ecosystem. And that is freely available to target ads, to target campaigns, to improve performance, to improve how people land on my site, what they do with my site, etc. Suddenly, it's a whole new world of opportunity. And I think brands, certainly from our experience when we're talking to the market, are getting really excited about the potential of that kind of first-party value being properly activated.
Interesting. And then on the flip side of that, I guess it's the publishers. And is this the known audience that we've talked about in the last couple of videos? Is that what this first-party data is for them?
Yeah, I've said it before, a reality of a world where third-party cookies are not the portability of data. It really comes down to known audience keys providing that connectivity and that portability underneath. That's what InfoSum is built to do, and thankfully does it very, very well, very, very well. I think from a publisher point of view, there's kind of two schools of value. First is that by creating that known audience kind of infrastructure, they give environments to those brands where they can unlock that brand first-party data and value. They can come and say, right, great, who do we both know? Great, I know these people here and they're audience A. Secretly as a brand, I know their customers. I don't have to tell the publisher that. The publisher can work out how many of those audience A they know and then do something with them or don't do something with them based off what the brand wants them to do. So it's great because it creates that environment, and that's a really positive thing. It allows for really kind of direct, obvious, structured buys, which is positive. But the second thing is brands themselves have lots of first-party knowledge of their audience, how they engage, some of the kind of relationship around interaction, and even some of the e-commerce kind of acquisition metrics that they collect as part of their kind of publisher environment. Those at the moment, much like brands, sit dormant, locked up in these CRM systems, locked up in these environments, first-party environments that they're fearful of activating. They're fearful of putting into a third-party environment. Because A, they can't necessarily or easily control the privacy around it, which is really important. But B, they lose the commercial, or they have the commercial trust issues of losing control once they've given it to somebody else. So, the yin and yang, if they're able to unlock those opportunities, unlock those insights, and present them as kind of data-driven value propositions to brands in a safe and trusted manner, that's a huge boom for publishers. So on both sides of the equation, this ability to unlock and activate, drive insights, drive value, but in this kind of decentralized, privacy-safe, commercially trusted way, reaps huge benefits for both brands and publishers in that space.
And then for the parties in the middle, so if we take media agencies and things like that, I guess what you're talking about there is potential to access to second-party data, so access to another party's first-party data. What's the impact of that on media agencies, the opportunities for publisher co-ops? What's kind of the world we're looking at there?
Yeah, and I think if any of our conversations to date are a good kind of barometer of the opportunity there, I think it's significant. Again, simplifying it down really, really far, the challenge in that space has always been that take a media agency as an example, they have to become that third party. If they're in the current ecosystem, they're bringing in data from their brands, and they're bringing in their data and opportunity from the publisher. That has to be centralised in something that the media agency owns or contracts, like DMP or CDP, whatever it is. At that point, they become a processor. They potentially become a controller of that data. They have to get their hands dirty inside that data space. They have to take liability. They have to take risk. They don't want to. That's not what they're designed to do. What they want to be able to do is say, I want to connect that, and I want to plan and buy against the activation value of that. I don't necessarily want to get my hands dirty because I don't need to. So when we're out speaking to brands and we talk about the way that the InfoSum platform works as an example, but more broadly around this kind of portability around a first-party environment, they get excited about the opportunities that presents for really high quality, deep insights, analysis, planning, buying opportunities without the associated commercial trust and privacy risks.
Yeah.
The second party data bit is I think also hugely important. It really is the same as the first party bit. It's just this principle of if I have a first party relationship over here, I can sell that to you in a safe, privacy safe, commercially trusted way. You can access that and either directly buy against me or take that into other environments through that portability. But it's still kind of that high quality first party data delivered in a trusted way.
As you can tell, there's a huge amount we could talk about on the subject of first party data and the connectivity that provides. So if you'd like Stu or any member of the team to come out and talk to you about what we could do for you to activate your first party data, just get in touch. And be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out when new videos like this drop, and visit infosum.com for more information. But until then, thanks for watching.